I think there's lots of concerns as a result of what's been happening here recently. We have concerns. We provide funding to the FSIN as a province, so therefore the taxpayers do, and it's not meant to go for severance. That's not the point of the funding we would want to offer FSIN. It's about programs. It's about closing educational outcomes for First Nations and non-First Nations. It's about working with the FSIN on a number of very important issues. So, it's not, obviously this isn't something the government likes to see. We're reviewing the funding of the province of FSIN. I think we'll be contacting them to get some assurances that whatever the amount of the severance is, that it's not, that it isn't coming from resources, that the province wants to be there to help First Nations people, because we have some concerns about what's happened in the last few days.
So you're not happy with the way this has unfolded then?
Well, the bottom line is FSIN is the structure is much like a corporation, and they have a degree of independence. Obviously, they're going to do what they want to do, but they also have funding partners, and we're one of them. And I think funding partners will want to know that the dollars we're providing on behalf of taxpayers is going for the things that it should go towards. For example, educational outcome improvement for First Nations students across the province, or the other initiatives we have on the duty to consult and capacity building. That's why those resources are there, and we're going to be seeking those assurances, but we'll work with the new chief and vice chiefs of the FSIN.
Sure, finally, Premier, though, is there a contradiction here when, in many respects, First Nations governments have relied on the courts to sort out grievances that they have with either provincial governments or the federal government, and yet they're not willing to abide by a court ruling with respect to Chief Lonechild?
Well, I think there needs to be consistency, to be sure. I think that if any group is going to the courts for validation of a position, then they ought to also respect the fact that when the courts happen to disagree with the position that they've taken. I think that's reasonable. In this case, I don't think you could. You can't say after yesterday that they haven't. They've reached an agreement with Guy Lonechild, so they're not right now they're not standing in a position in a conflict with the court ruling that came down earlier this week.
Sure, just briefly, the courts have ruled that this is not a sovereign government, that this is akin to a voluntary organization.
Yeah.
They've now given a severance package, which is akin to an organization rather than a political body.
Right.
Are you going to treat them differently rather than a government-to-government relations? Will this be changed now?
We have a partnership with the FSIN, and the partnership has been, we as a government have approached it this way. We've wanted to achieve certain things together. We've been goal and task oriented in the relationship with FSIN, rather than just sort of here's a broad relationship where we provide general funding. We've said if we can work together on projects, for example, reducing the educational outcomes for First Nations and non-First Nations, we're prepared to do that. If we can work together with the FSIN to help facilitate a brand new First Nations-based power generating authority, where they can be a part of the power generation needs of the province going forward, as they have done, we're prepared to do that. We're working with tribal councils in ways that that previous administrations have not. For example, for the first time ever in a forest management allocation agreement, the province of Saskatchewan has allocated to a tribal council, to First Nations, so they're part of that industry. So we're on a case-by-case, objective-by-objective basis. We're going to work with the FSIN and more significantly with individual First Nations and tribal councils.
Sure. I guess essentially, though, do you consider the FSIN to be a sovereign government?
No. I mean, the First Nations that they represent, that's the nation-to-nation relationship that the Crown has with First Nations, and therefore the provinces have with First Nations. And so we certainly understand and respect that. And that would be true of tribal councils as well, like the Saskatchewan Tribal Council. But I don't think you could ascribe the same characteristics to the FSIN that you would to the individual First Nations or the tribal councils.